Hi guys, this is Tabitha Servers. Welcome back to my channel. In this episode, I'm going to show you how I made my Naofumi from Shield Hero cosplay. Uh, this is kind of one of my favorite cosplays I made this year, besides my big Yoko cosplay. I used two patterns specifically for this cosplay. This McCall's pattern here, which is a pair of jeans, and the Simplicity pattern, which is a pajama set. I use these patterns a lot when I'm just doing mock-ups to like add and adjust. One of the fabrics I used was this brown 100% linen that I used for Shield Heroes uh, vest, I would call it, and this yellow stretch bottom weight that's pretty thick. I use this to make the bias tape for his pants. Um, I was using this for another cosplay and I had a lot left over. And this green fabric I used to make his pants. It's a another bottom weight, almost a denim. I hated it so much, not because it was hard to work with, but it collected lint and hair like no other business. I used a brown knit to make his gloves, because I didn't want to have to use Velcro, and I have a small enough hand and wrist to basically put my hand through gloves. So the gloves are made with the knit, the pleather, and the Sherpa. And of course, Sherpa, for like a lot of his costume, has fake fur on it. And then I used three colors of different vinyls that look like leather. Most of them were used on his shoes. I got these shoes from Goodwill that I then just basically modified. I glued the dark brown on the toe of the shoe, then sewed on the gray vinyl, and then the top piece of the shoe is removable with Velcro to do the brown flaps and add the Sherpa edging, which I also then did similar to the gloves with the Sherpa edging, and I hand sewed the leather to the knit glove. Uh, but overall, I'm going to show you how I made this costume. So first off, I used the Simplicity pattern to make a long sleeve shirt for his tunic, and then I just added a collar and a V neckline to it. This was easy. I didn't even have to do a mock-up because I've made so many undershirts, so I know how this pattern works for me. Um, the only difference was trying to figure out how long I wanted to make the tunic. Um, So I ended up having to actually cut my sleeves shorter because I didn't want too much bulk under the gloves or too much bulk under the pants. Uh, this probably took me about maybe 3 hours to make, in between having to make the bias tape. Because I did have to, I bias taped all of the edge of the tunic and the collar and the cuffs. So that took me a while to make the bias tape for that. And then I made a mock-up for the vest using the same shirt pattern. And then I played around to find out how short I wanted to make the sleeves of the vest, all of the lines, because this vest, as you see, I'll put a photo here, um, has a lot of like intricate cuts into it. And I wanted to make sure I did those right. I wish I used a darker pen so you guys could have seen me doing the lines, but I also didn't want for the ink to seep through the fabric. Although it is a black tunic, so you probably wouldn't even notice a little black stain on black fabric. That in the tunic, whatever stains would have been hidden. So next time, I'll figure it out a way so you can actually see the lines. Uh, and then once that was done, I took apart the mock-up and took out my linen and cut out my pieces, and I gave myself like a 1 inch seam allowance practically on every piece, because I was going to be doing a unique type of hemming on both the vest and the cloak. Um, so I needed at least enough seam allowance to do this new style of seam allowance. Uh, it's called the flat-felled seam. I had to look it up because I almost forgot how it was pronounced. Uh, it's a lot of fun to use, and I probably should have put some practice in before I actually started using it on this cosplay. But I thought I had an understanding of how it worked, so I just went with it, and I pretty much did it. There were some issues that I had to like seam rip and redo, but overall, that I think that only happened like maybe 3 times, and all of the like either the cloak or vest. Uh, it's basically when you have a seam allowance, you can either serge it or do a zigzag stitch. Well, with the flat felled seam, you're going to cut one part of the seam allowance down after you sew it, and then you're going to fold the other one underneath it, and then iron it flat, and then sew it down. So you're going to have like on one side 2 top stitches, and then once you switch it to the other side, you're gonna have another stitch that's just a single top stitch. Um, Usually the one with the 2 top stitches is the correct side, but for aesthetic purposes, I use the one with the 2 top stitching on the outside of most of my costume, I think, because I just liked it. Uh, but a majority of it, you want the side that's the 1 stitch, and I did use most of the 1 stitch side, especially for the tunic. Uh, and this took me a while. I would say with this process, as you're seeing me here do this flat felled seam, it takes twice as long instead of just serging it like normal. But I just really wanted that aesthetic look, and I kind of liked it. I don't know when I'll use this method again, but hopefully it will be sometime in the near future. And I'll put a little image right around here to give you an idea of what it looks like in an image, like in a line art, so you have an idea of what I meant when I described how to do it. Because it's very simple, an easy way to finish a seam if you wanted to make it perfect for a contest. But it is time consuming instead of just doing like a normal zigzag stitch, or if you have a serger. The next thing I worked on were the pants. Like I said, I used that McCall's pattern. I'll put an image here so you can see what it looked like again. And I just had to modify it a bit to add the weird like top part, because he's got this like an extra bit of like design to his pants that go above the belt loops. And then I had to bias tape that edging. So I had to make a lot of bias tape for this cosplay, and it was really hard to, I couldn't put the fabric through my like bias tape making devices, so I had to do it all by hand, which can be a little time consuming. Um, but I've done this a few times already, so it was super easy to do. So it didn't take as long as it would have if I had just learned how to make bias tape. And it was kind of hard because he has bias tape around like the little crotch pleats of the jeans that he's wearing. So it was kind of hard to do a loop because it's like a thick bias tape. And what I ended up doing was instead of doing bias tape for that, I did it with piping. And so I used an already piped it already was like finished piping, but it was too bright of a yellow and I wanted it to be consistent. So I just overlaid the fabric on top, and it worked out really well. It was tricky to do around the corner. If it was, I think, a wider circle, it would have looked smoother. But you know what? No one should be looking that close to my costume. And this is not technically a costume piece. I might use this to do a skit, because I think this would be a really cool costume to do a skit in. Uh, I used a metal zipper for the jeans. I mean, for his pants, and that you know, it's normal, easy. If you're unsure how to work with zippers, don't start with a metal zipper. Just use the polyesters. When you're more advanced with working with zippers, then I would suggest using metal zippers. Uh, because if your needle hits the metal, it's going to break, and that could like throw you off. Uh, but I've worked with zippers enough to work with metal zippers, and sometimes I forget that I'm short, and I usually have to account for that because I had to cut off at least 3 inches on the hemline of these pants. But I had to make sure they were long enough to be able to wear them. Uh, Fun fact: I added pockets to these jeans because every cosplayer loves pockets. However, uh, his leg armor covers the pockets, so I can't really use the pockets. So I ended up having to use one of my Renaissance Fair pouches that I just hide at the back of my pants on the belt. But yeah, I forgot about that. So I made pockets that I can't really use, but it's fine. I'll use them eventually. The funnest part of making this costume was the leg armor, actually. Uh, Usually people will just make the armor and then paint it with airbrushing or spray paint. I decided to do something that I kind of picked up when I was in Indonesia, which is just glue the vinyl to the pleather. And I used barge cement glue, got some vinyl remnants from Joanne Fabrics, and then just had fun. I basically, um, with all the pieces I bought, which is some EVA foam, I use, I think, 4 millimeter for the leg armor, and then I bought half belved rods from, I think it's called TNT Cosplay. Uh, I'm not sure. I'll put the link down below where I got uh, the EVA foam, and I made the fabric. I gave myself seam allowance with the vinyl so that I could wrap it around the EVA foam, and then I glued the pieces together with the contact cement glue once it was done drying. I think this took me a few days to work on, mostly because as I was working on it, it was cold outside, like super cold outside. So I could only do a little bit at a time before I was freezing. Um, so I think these took me about 4 days, maybe 5 days to make both leg pieces. Uh, give or take a day. I can't really remember because I made this costume like a few months ago. Uh, and then for the Sherpa around the leg armor, I made, I bought some bias tape from Joann's, and I clamped it around the Sherpa, uh, so that the Sherpa wouldn't fray and we get little specks of Sherpa because I had noticed that the green fabric picked up every lint and hair fibers just by being on the floor. Um, so I wanted to make sure that I would not have any Sherpa flaking off. And then I cement glued it with the barge around the edges. And then I had to go in and hand stitch the Sherpa to the pleather because when I glued it, you'll see in the image in the next few seconds of me gluing it around the edges, the Sherpa kept curling to the inside of the shoe, the inside of the leg armor. So I had to use hand stitching to get the Sherpa to fold outwards to the outside of the shoe, to the leg armor. Uh, it was kind of hard to do, but I used a thin needle, a very thin, sharp needle to go through the pleather. Uh, Probably would have been easier to use a curved needle, but I'm very bad at using curved needles. So it was just easier for me to just use it. Uh, but yeah, you can see like towards the top of the leg garment, it was curling to the inside, and I needed it to do the opposite. The next part, which was like the simplest part of this costume, was the cloak. Uh, with the cloak, I just used that simplicity pattern. I will put an image right here so you can actually see a closer look to it. And then it was actually the perfect size because for some reason his cloak is a very short cloak. And uh, it was kind of easy. Just make the cloak, which I've made cloaks multiple times. It literally probably only took me an hour and a half to do because once again, I used the flat felled seam to make the cloak as well. So it just took me a lot longer than I usually would if I was just serging it. But I kind of wanted to give this a raw look because back, in the way the show is, you kind of get the feeling that this is old timey. So I don't think they had sergers in this world. So I just wanted to look finished, but at the same time not have serging done. Uh, I did serge my jeans, but you know, no one's gonna look inside the jeans because I got the boots on, I got a belt on. I made an exception for that. But for the cloak and the vest, I did the flat felled seam because I thought it would look better. It was really hard to do it on curves. So I don't know if there is a technique for curves for the flat felled seam. Um, but it wasn't the best looking seam, which was the hood part of this cloak. But anything after that worked really well. So I'm very happy with how the cloak came out. And of course, it's uh, just fun to have a cosplay with a cloak, especially if it ends up raining on the day you're wearing it at a con, or if it's snowing during a con. Because there are a few winter cons, like I know once I went to Anime Milwaukee right before it snowed, and then it snowed right after the convention when I was leaving. So, like, yeah, it's just fun to have a cloak. And it also looks really good when you're doing photos because you can have a friend flare it out for photos and make cool action shots. Uh, so, yeah, I always like doing cloaks. They're easy to make and they're just fun to have. It's a good prop for photos. Uh, and like I said, I used the flat felled seam on most of this costume. Hardest part was the area where I put the hood and the body of the cloak. Uh, but I don't know. I think it came out fine. Like I said, this is not like a walk-on contest piece. I might do a skit with this costume. I think it would be really fun to do an action skit with my Naofumi cosplay. So, uh, of course, most people uh, would probably do the cloak differently than how I did. Because I know in some of the images, the fur on the cloak is detachable. I just left it attached to my cloak. I just really wanted the look. So, and I don't know, I like a fur trimmed cloak. So here is the rest of my cosplay. I didn't film making the chest plate, but I plan to remake my chest plate because I'm not happy with it. And I will put a link down below on how I made my shield because I used a reference video to make my shield. So enjoy the rest of the video.